The sleeve slipped at 9:47 inches the evening. That was the detail that changed everything. Not the pregnancy, not the silence, not even the way she moved through the east corridor, like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, slow, careful, deliberate, the way a person moves when they have been punished for being noticed. It was the sleeve. 1 inch, maybe 2, sliding back from her wrist as she reached for the highest shelf, cloth dragging across the wood in those slow, circular strokes that had probably worn a path into her muscle memory by now. The chandelier above caught the light the wrong way, and there they were, 3 bruises, purple bleeding into green at the edges, sitting on her forearm in a pattern that no one who had ever seen controlled violence could mistake for anything else. Dante Moreau stopped walking. He had been crossing the corridor on his way to the west staircase, moving the way he always moved through his own house, quickly, purposefully, without looking at anything that didn't require his attention. The mansion was large enough that he could go 3 days without entering certain wings. The staff existed in his peripheral vision, invisible by design, invisible by habit, but something made him stop. The smell of lemon polish hung in the air, the chandelier hummed, the cloth moved, and then the sleeve slipped. She felt him before she saw him. He watched it happen, the almost invisible change in her spine, a tightening so practiced it barely registered as movement. Her free hand dropped immediately to her stomach, not reaching, not adjusting, protecting. The flat-palmed, unconscious press of a woman whose body had learned, without being asked, to shield the one thing in her life that still needed shielding. She turned. Her eyes found him, and the corridor did something a corridor has no business doing. It folded time. Hi, viewers. Have you ever looked at someone you used to know and realized the person standing in front of you had been through something you were never told about? Because that is exactly what happened to Dante in that hallway. He knew that face, not the stillness in it, not the careful blankness that sat behind her eyes like a door someone had locked from the inside, not the way she held her jaw level, controlled, the jaw of a person who has learned that showing pain is a liability, but the face beneath all of that, the actual bone structure, the specific curve of her mouth, the way her dark hair fell loose from its tie on the left side and she hadn't fixed it, probably hadn't noticed that face. He knew. He had known it when it was young and unguarded, and laughed at things that weren't even funny, just because laughing felt good. Maribel, she said. Mr. Moreau, in a voice so professionally level it was almost an insult. He said nothing, because there is a specific kind of silence that comes before words when the words haven't caught up to what the body already knows. His chest had moved before his mind did. Something had shifted in the region below his ribs. Not rage, not yet. Something older than rage. Something that lives in the part of a person that was formed before they knew how to protect themselves from feeling things. He recognized her silence more than her face. That was the thing. She had been, once, the loudest laugher in any room she walked into. Not obnoxious, not performing, just genuinely, fully present in whatever was funny, in whatever was good, in whatever small moment was worth celebrating. She laughed the way some people breathe like they couldn't help it, like it was just the natural output of being alive. There was no trace of that in her now. Known. He stood in the hallway of his own house and looked at a woman who had learned to disappear inside herself. And the distance between who she had been and who was standing in front of him felt like something he could measure, like a wound with visible edges. I'll finish the corridor, she said, already turning back to the shelf. She kept cleaning. The cloth moved in the same slow circles. She cleaned the same spot she had already cleaned. And Dante stood there, a man who controlled 3 import corridors and 47 people who would walk into fire on his word, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could name, completely and utterly without a useful response to what was directly in front of him. He had buried someone once who had also learned how not to scream. He had told himself, standing at that grave, that he would never be in a position to know about suffering and do nothing. He had believed himself. He looked at the bruises one more time. Then he asked the only question his mouth would form. Who did that to you? She didn't answer. She kept cleaning. The cloth moved. The chandelier hummed. And Dante Moreau stood in the hallway of his own house and understood, with the cold clarity of a man who reads rooms for a living, that whatever silence Maribel was carrying it was not the silence of someone who didn't want to talk. It was the silence of someone who had learned that talking made things worse. He turned and walked to his office, but he did not sleep that night, and by morning, he had made one phone call. One quiet, precise, specific phone call. That would pull a thread. And that thread, as threads in certain kinds of stories always do, was attached to something much larger than either of them could see from where they were standing. Dante sat at his desk for 14 minutes and did nothing. That had not happened in 11 years. His office was the kind of room that communicated power without trying floor-to-ceiling glass on the east wall, city laid out below like a map he had personally drawn, desk cleared to a single folder, and a phone, and a glass of water that had been sitting there so long it was room temperature. He had designed the room to feel like the inside of a controlled mind. Everything in its place, everything with a purpose. He stared at the water. 14 minutes. Then he pressed the intercom. Lena, the maid in the east corridor. Her name is Maribel. Pull her employment file and put it on my desk. A brief pause on the other end. Of course, Mr. Moreau. He released the button. His empire, because that was the correct word for it. Not business, not organization. Empire. Built from 20 years of decisions that compounded on each other the way interest compounds, quietly, and then all at once ran on his ability to stay ahead of information, to know things before other people knew he knew them, to treat knowledge the way a surgeon treats a scalpel. Precisely, without hesitation, never more than necessary. He was very good at knowing things. He had not known Maribel was in his house. He did not know how long she had been here. He did not know who had put those bruises on her arm. 3 things, 3 gaps, in a man who had built his entire life around having no gaps. The file arrived in 8 minutes. A thin folder, green. Lena set it on the corner of his desk and withdrew without speaking because she understood. After 6 years, when a room required silence, he opened it. Hartwell Domestic Placements, standard contract header, start date 4 months ago, position, household domestic, references, 2 letters, both from addresses he didn't recognize. Emergency contact line, blank. Emergency contact, blank. He read that line twice. There was one line in the personal history section, filled in with handwriting that was smaller than the form expected, as if she had been trying to take up less space, even on paper. Previous residence, relocated from prior housing arrangement. That was all. She had left a house once with nothing but a plastic bag and silence. He didn't know yet what house. He didn't know yet whose silence. But the shape of what he was looking at was beginning to form the way shapes form in fog, not suddenly, not clearly, but with the particular slow certainty of something that was always there, waiting to be seen. He closed the folder, ordered surveillance. Quiet, thorough, no contact, no approach, no interference. Just eyes, just information. The kind of watching that gathered facts before it allowed conclusions, because he had learned, in 11 years of running an empire, that the most expensive mistakes came from people who acted before they fully understood what they were acting on. He would understand first. Then he would decide. He went to bed at 2 a.m. He lay there for an hour thinking about a girl in a church basement who once told him, "The moon watches over people who don't have anyone else." He had thought about that line exactly 0 times in 20 years. He thought about it now, and understood that he had filed it away somewhere deep. The way you file things that are too tender to look at directly, but too important to throw out. He thought about her hand going to her stomach, the reflex of it, the pure, unthinking protection in it. He thought about her saying Mr. Moreau in that flat, careful voice. He closed his eyes. In her room off the east kitchen, Maribel lay on her side with both hands pressed to her stomach, and felt the baby move and thought, "Not yet, not yet. We're not ready yet." She had a broken wristwatch in the front pocket of the uniform she'd hung on the back of the door. It had stopped at 4:17. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe because it was the last thing she had owned before a man decided that what she owned and what she was were both his to determine. Maybe because stopped things still hold the shape of when they were running. She closed her eyes. Down the hall, someone knocked on a door she hadn't heard knocked on before. She went still. The knock came again. Soft, specific. Not the knock of someone angry, not the knock of someone impatient. The knock of someone who had practiced being deliberate. She didn't answer. It stopped. And in the silence that followed, she heard something she hadn't expected: footsteps walking away. Just walking away. No pressure. No consequence. No door opened by force. Just the sound of someone leaving her alone. She exhaled, pressed her hands tighter to her stomach, and somewhere in her chest, in a place she had not checked on in a long time because checking on it used to hurt, something shifted by 1 degree. Not hope. She had learned to be careful about that word, but the thing that lives just before hope, the thing that looks at a door and thinks, maybe. In the morning, the name Ronan Hale appeared in a report on Dante's desk for the first time. It was in a footnote. He almost missed it. He didn't. The employment chain took 48 hours to fully surface. Dante's investigator was a man named Carver. Quiet, thorough. The kind of person who understood that the most important information usually lived one level below the obvious. He had worked for Dante for 9 years, and he set the folder on the glass desk on a Wednesday afternoon with the particular care of a man who had read what was inside it and wished he hadn't. Hartwell Domestic Placements, Carver began. On paper, standard domestic staffing agency. Placement fee, contract terms, quarterly reviews, nothing unusual in the public filings. Dante waited. Off paper. Carver paused. It's a control system. The words sat in the room. They identify women in specific situations. Single, pregnant, financially vulnerable, undocumented, or close enough to undocumented that the distinction doesn't offer much protection. The contracts are designed to be unpayable. Placement fees structured so the debt compounds faster than the salary clears it. The women stay because leaving the contract means the debt follows them, and the debt is attached to things that matter: housing, legal status, in some cases child custody arrangements that were written into the fine print of agreements they signed when they had no one explaining the fine print to them. Dante was looking at the folder and not opening it. Who runs it? Frontman is a man named Garrett Sims. Operates out of a leased office in Midtown. 3 staff members. Looks completely legitimate from the outside. But the operating capital, the real contract authority, and the enforcement structure all trace back to one name. Carver set a single photograph on the desk. Ronan Hale. Dante looked at the photograph. Ronan Hale was 56. Silver at the temples. Well-dressed in the specific way of men who understand that clothing is a signal that the right suit in the right room means certain questions don't get asked. He was smiling in the photograph in the way men smile when they have never been in a room where someone could say no to them and make it stick. How many households? Dante asked. 3 that I've confirmed, possibly 5, all currently housing pregnant women, all contracted through Hartwell, all with the same structural terms. Dante was quiet for a moment. The surveillance footage from the East Wing camera. Carver's expression didn't change. I pulled it per your request. It exists. Send it to my private terminal. Already done. Carver left. Dante sat with the folder for 3 minutes before opening it. Inside were copies of Maribel's contract, 22 pages for a domestic employment arrangement, which was already its own answer to a question he hadn't needed to ask. He read every page. He understood contract language the way he understood most languages fluently, with the specific attention of someone who had learned early that the danger was always in what the words permitted, rather than what they said. He found 4 clauses that should not exist in any legitimate employment contract. He marked them with a pen. Then he went to his private terminal and watched the footage. He sat in front of the screen for 22 minutes after it ended. He did not move. He did not speak. There was a specific kind of anger that lived below rage, below the hot, immediate thing that wanted to break something. A cold anger. Structural, the kind that looked at what it was seeing and began, without being directed, to calculate, to organize, to understand the full architecture of a thing before deciding precisely where to apply pressure. That was where Dante was. 2 floors below, Maribel was on her hands and knees in the bathroom off the second guest suite, scrubbing the grout between floor tiles with a narrow brush. The tile was already clean. She had cleaned it yesterday, but the motion of the brush had become something her hands defaulted to when the thinking got too loud, back and forth, the rhythm of it a small, reliable mercy. Her stomach made the position difficult. She adjusted, kept going. The broken wristwatch was in her pocket. She didn't know why she'd brought it with her today. She usually left it in her room, but this morning she'd picked it up before leaving and held it for a moment. The stopped hands, the cracked crystal face, the small dent on the lower right corner from a drop she still remembered the sound of, and put it in her uniform pocket, because today felt like a day she needed to carry something. She didn't think about why. She just kept scrubbing. Carver called Dante at 6:42 that evening. There's something else. A pause. The financial irregularities in Hartwell's secondary accounts. They run through a series of LLCs. Standard obfuscation structure. Nothing unusual there. But 2 of those LLCs share registered agents with contractors who have done work in your network. Not direct, not traceable to anyone in your organization specifically, but adjacent. The kind of adjacent that, if it surfaced in the wrong context, would require explanation. Dante held the phone. How adjacent? 1 degree. Maybe 1.5. A silence. I need every name, Dante said. Every connection. Every LLC. Everything. Understood. And Carver. Yes. No one outside this investigation knows we're running it. Of course. He ended the call. Sat in the dark of his office for a long moment. His empire. 20 years building something that was supposed to give him complete control over information, over access, over the specific geography of who had power and who didn't in this city. A system designed to insulate him, to make him unreachable. And at its edges, in the spaces between the things he looked at directly, something had been operating. Not because of him, but not entirely without him either. That was the thing he kept turning over. He pulled up the security request form on his terminal, looked at the footage timestamp again, then at the contract clauses he'd marked, then at the LLC names in the financial report. He typed one name into the search field of his private records database. Marco Stein, his most trusted lieutenant, 12 years. The man who managed the contractor relationships that handled the adjacent work. The results loaded. He stared at the screen. In the East Wing kitchen, Maribel sat alone at the small table, with a bowl of soup she had made herself from whatever the main kitchen had set aside. She ate slowly. Between bites, her hand rested on her stomach. She whispered something. No one heard it. But if someone had been standing close enough, they would have heard a woman apologizing to her unborn child for a world the child hadn't asked to enter and promising, in the quiet way of people who have run out of large promises. One small specific thing. You will not be afraid of sounds. Down the hall, a camera that Dante had specifically requested be repositioned that morning recorded the corridor outside her room in real time. Feeding to his terminal. He was watching. Not as surveillance, not as control. As the first act of a man who had decided, without yet knowing the full cost, that he was not going to look away from this. The footage request came back with a new timestamp. Ronan Hale had entered the property 3 weeks ago. During a contractor walkthrough Dante had not been present for. Dante's hand went still on the desk. Then he pulled up the guest access log. Marco Stein had approved the visit. He watched the footage from 3 weeks ago in complete silence. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Ronan Hale walking the east corridor, stopping outside the room where Maribel slept. A conversation through the door that the camera's audio captured at low quality, but with enough clarity that the words, run-through enhancement, came out clean. You're behind. That's a problem. The contract doesn't allow for. I'm not talking about the contract. Then a sound. Then silence. Then Hale walking away, adjusting his jacket, checking his phone. Dante watched it 3 times. On the third viewing, he stopped it at the 4-second mark, just before Hale walked away and looked at the man's expression. Not angry. Not even particularly engaged. The face of someone completing an administrative task. The face of someone for whom this interaction registered, emotionally, somewhere between filing a report and ordering lunch. That was the part that took the longest to process. Not the violence, not the threat, the complete, undisturbed ordinariness of it. The way Ronan Hale had walked into a corridor of someone else's house and done what he did, and walked out again and checked his phone. Dante closed the footage. He did not act immediately. This surprised the part of himself that expected to. He had spent his entire adult life responding to threats with immediate, precise, overwhelming force. It was not cruelty, it was architecture. Threats that were not answered became permissions. Permissions compounded. He had learned this at 24, and applied it without exception for 2 decades. But he sat at his desk and breathed, and did not act. Because something Maribel had said, or rather something in the way she hadn't said things, was sitting in him like a splinter the way her hand went to her stomach, the way she had kept cleaning the same spot, the way she said Mr. Moreau in that flat voice, and looked at him with eyes that had learned to measure the danger in a room before deciding what to give it. He did not want to be another thing she had to measure. He told himself that was the reason for the pause. He was not entirely sure that was the whole truth. The near miss happened on a Tuesday. He had come in through the north entrance, a change to his usual route, something Petrov had recommended for security reasons that week, and was crossing the second-floor landing when he saw her below. East corridor. Supply caddy in both hands. Moving toward the linen closet at the base of the stairs, in that careful, load-bearing way of a woman whose center of gravity had shifted, and who had learned to compensate without being told how. Her foot caught the edge of the runner rug. The world compressed. Her hand shot to the wall. The caddy swung. She absorbed the momentum with her core, with her arms, with whatever reserves of physical control she had left after a day of work that should not have been assigned to anyone in her condition, and she held. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Body braced, caddy gripped. Then she exhaled, adjusted her hands, and kept walking. She did not look up. She did not know he had seen it. Dante stood on the landing and watched her disappear around the corner, and felt something in his chest that had no name in the vocabulary of a man who had spent 20 years refusing to let things land. It landed. He ate dinner that night at a table set for one, which was how his table was always set, in front of a folder of quarterly reports he opened, and did not read for 40 minutes. Carver had sent over a new financial breakdown, 3 more LLCs, 7 more contractor connections, 2 of which traced back to a staffing firm that had placed workers at 4 properties in Dante's network over the past 18 months. His network. He kept coming back to that. Not the anger at Hale that was clean, that was solvable. What kept pressing against the inside of his thinking was the other thing. The system he had built, the edges of it, the spaces between the things he watched directly where something had found room to operate because he hadn't been watching there. He imagined Maribel alone in the kitchen. He imagined her eating slowly, both hands on the table between bites, the way she probably ate like she cleaned methodically, quietly, taking up the minimum necessary space. He imagined her whispering something to the child. He picked up a pen and wrote on the corner of the quarterly report, not thinking, just writing. The way things come out when the thinking drops its guard. This is how fear survives. It teaches you to apologize for existing. He looked at the words. Put the pen down. Ronan Hale's assistant called at 9:15 to request a private meeting. Dante looked at the name on his phone screen for 4 seconds. Then he said yes. And in the small room off the east kitchen, Maribel pressed her palm flat to her stomach as the baby moved, and said out loud to no one, I know, I know, I know. Outside her window, the city kept its lights on the way it always did. Indifferent, bright, completely unaware of the specific weight a person can carry, while everyone around them goes about their business as though nothing in the world has been altered. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at noon. Dante had 41 hours. He spent every one of them preparing, not for a confrontation, for complete and total understanding, because he had decided quietly, without announcement, in the way he made all his real decisions that when he moved on this, there would be no gaps. Not one. Ronan Hale arrived 3 minutes early, which told Dante something. Men who arrived 3 minutes early to meetings with people they believed were their equals were men who needed the small psychological advantage of already being settled in the room when the other person walked in. Men who were genuinely confident arrived on time. Men who were performing confidence arrived early. Dante let him wait for 6 minutes before entering. The sitting room off the main study was neutral ground, not the office, which was power, not the dining room, which was hospitality, but the intermediate space that communicated. This is a conversation with no predetermined outcome. Hale was seated in the leather chair by the east window, phone in hand, jacket unrumpled, looking like a man who had no particular concerns about where he was or who he was about to speak to. He stood when Dante entered, extended a hand. Dante shook it. They sat. I appreciate you making the time, Hale said. His voice was exactly as Carver had described, measured, pleasant. The voice of a man who had learned that warmth was more useful than coldness for most of what he needed to accomplish. I wanted to reach out personally. I understand one of my contracted employees has been housed here for several months. That's right. These arrangements can sometimes create complications. A small, apologetic gesture of the hands. Women in those contract situations, particularly toward the end of a pregnancy, can become emotionally complex. Attachments form, misunderstandings about the nature of the arrangement. I've found it's always better to have a direct conversation before anything gets miscommunicated. Dante looked at him. He let the silence run for 4 full seconds, long enough to be deliberate, not long enough to be theatrical. What kind of misunderstanding are you concerned about? Dante asked. Hale smiled. Just that the contract structure is clear. The placement arrangement has terms that supersede the household's employment relationship. So if there are questions about her status, her obligations, her situation, those are really conversations she should be having with Hartwell, not with the household. Her situation, Dante repeated. The pregnancy, the financial arrangement, all of it. Hale opened his hands. I'm sure you understand. It's just cleaner when everyone knows who has authority over what. Dante looked at him for a long moment. Ronan Hale had, across 20 years, looked at many people across many tables. He had a practiced read, the kind that came from experience, from patterns, from a lifetime of correctly assessing which men were going to be problems and which were going to be manageable. He had walked into this room, carrying the reasonable confidence of a man whose name was attached to enough money and enough connections to make most problems resolve themselves quietly. He was reading Dante wrong. "I'll be in touch," Dante said. He stood. The meeting was over. Hale's smile held for 2 seconds longer than it should have, the lag of a man recalibrating. Then he stood, shook hands again, and was escorted out by Petrov. Dante went directly to his office, sat down, called Carver, run Hale's full connection history against Marco Stein. Every interaction, every transaction, every contractor overlap. I need the complete picture. A silence. Dante. Carver's voice was careful. Marco Stein is your... I know who he is. If this surfaces, then it surfaces. Run it. He ended the call. He sat at his desk and looked at the city for a long moment, and felt the particular coldness that comes when you have confirmed something you already knew, but needed to have confirmed before you could act on it. Not surprise. Not even grief. Just the flat, clean weight of a thing being real. 12 years. Marco Stein had been inside his organization for 12 years, not directing what Hale did. Dante didn't believe that. Marco was not strategic enough for that kind of play, and more importantly, he did not have the cruelty for it. What Marco had was the particular moral laziness of a man who knew something was wrong and decided the knowing didn't require the doing anything, who had signed off on contractor relationships without reading far enough down the page, who had let a referral go through because the money was clean on his end, and what happened on someone else's end was someone else's accounting. That was worse, in some ways, than intention. Intention had edges. You could argue with intention. This was just indifference. The specific violence of someone who looked away. And Marco Stein had been inside his organization for 12 years, handling contractor relationships, and whatever he had looked away from had included the chain of events that ended with Maribel in an east corridor, with bruises on her arm. Dante sat with that. He gave it the full weight it required. Then he walked down to the east wing. She was at the far end of the corridor, bucket at her feet, cloth in her hand. She heard him coming, and her shoulders did the thing, the small, almost imperceptible brace, the preparation. He stopped 3 feet away. She turned. He held out his hand. She looked at it. In his palm was the cleaning cloth she had dropped 2 days ago, and he had picked up. He had kept it on his desk, which he was aware was a strange thing to do, and had no clean explanation for. She stared at it for a moment. Then she looked at his face. He kept his hand out. She reached and took it from him, and as she did, her fingers brushed his palm not intentionally, just the geometry of passing a small object between 2 people standing close, and she looked up one more time before looking away. 1 second. Maybe less. But he saw something move in her eyes. Not relief. Not trust. It was too early for trust. They were both too old to pretend trust arrived in corridors at 8 in the evening. But something. The thing that lives just before trust. The thing that looks at a door and thinks, maybe. She turned back to the wall. He turned to walk away. He had taken 4 steps when Petrov appeared at the end of the corridor, moving too quickly, phone in hand, the specific gait of someone carrying information that could not wait. Petrov reached him, leaned close. Carver found the full connection tree. A pause. There's a name in it that's not Marco. Dante looked at him. Someone closer. Behind them, in the quiet of the corridor, Maribel pressed her hand to her stomach and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The absence, for just a moment, of the constant low hum of dread. She didn't know why. She held on to it anyway. Then her knees buckled, and she caught herself on the wall and her hand came away red. The blood was not what it looked like. That was what the doctor said, 40 minutes later, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, while Maribel lay on her left side with a monitor strapped to her stomach, and her hands folded in her lap with the particular stillness of a woman who had learned to wait for bad news without showing that she was waiting. A small vessel, stress-related. The baby's heartbeat was strong, 144 beats per minute, steady, indifferent to the crisis happening outside it. Rest was required. Monitoring overnight. Nothing irreversible. The doctor said nothing irreversible and moved to the next patient. Maribel stared at the ceiling. Dante sat in the waiting room on a chair that was too small for him. elbows on his knees, phone in his hand, not looking at the phone. He had sent 3 men with her in the ambulance. She had arrived at the hospital with no emergency contact, no one to call, a woman alone with a clipboard, and a situation that was not supposed to have a witness. He had gotten there 11 minutes after the ambulance, and had spent the time since sitting in this chair, thinking about the specific image of her hand coming away from the wall with blood on it, and feeling something he did not have a clean word for. He did not go in that night. He understood, without being told, that walking into her room in that moment, with all of what he was attached to him, the house, the name, the power, would not be comfort. It would be pressure. Another thing she had to manage. Another presence in a room she needed to breathe in. He stayed in the chair. He sent Lena in with water and a phone charger, and specific instructions not to mention him. He sat there until the monitors stabilized, and the night shift settled, and the hallway outside her room went quiet. Then he drove home. And the next evening, he came back. No suit jacket. No phone in his hand. He had thought about what he was walking into, and made a decision about what he needed to leave outside the door. Not his authority. He couldn't remove that. It was structural. It was attached to every room he walked into, but the performance of it, the posture, the way he usually occupied space. He knocked. She said, "Come in." He sat in the chair beside her bed. Not across from her. Not in front of her. Beside her, which was a different geometry entirely. It meant he wasn't waiting for anything, wasn't positioned to receive anything, was just occupying the same direction as her, both of them facing the same blank wall. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the posture of someone with nowhere to be. "Zuri," he said. She turned her head. "That's what we called you." His voice was level, quiet. Not nostalgic, he was too careful for nostalgia in this room, but specific. "Your grandmother. She called you Zuri first, and it spread. I don't think half the kids in that basement even knew your real name." A silence. "Nobody's called me that in a long time," she said. "I know." She looked at the ceiling again. "You shouldn't be here, Dante." "Probably not." I don't need." She stopped, started again. "I'm not something that needs to be handled." "I know that too." "Then why are you here?" He thought about it. Actually thought about it. Which was not something he did often in the middle of conversations. He usually knew his answers before the question finished forming. But this one required something more honest than a prepared response. "Because I walked past that corridor," he said, "and I saw you, and I remembered who you were before all of this, and I thought..." He stopped. "I thought that person deserved someone to sit in the room. That's all." She was quiet for a long time. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. 1:44. 1:44. The baby, entirely unconcerned. When she spoke again, it came out in pieces. Not a speech, not a prepared account, fragments the way a person tells something they have not rehearsed because they have been spending their energy on not thinking about it. A contract. A man who spoke softly. A financial arrangement that looked like help from the outside and looked like a cage from the inside. And by the time she understood the difference, the door had already been closed and latched from a direction she couldn't reach. She didn't describe the violence directly. She described the silence around it, the way certain hours of certain days had a weight to them, the way she had learned to read a room by sound footsteps, the particular rhythm of breathing, the difference between a door opening with intention and a door opening with direction. Dante listened, completely. Without the calculating layer, he usually couldn't turn off. When she stopped, the room held it. Then she said, quietly, like she was confessing something she expected to be argued with, "I don't want him destroyed." He looked at her. "I mean that." Her hand went to her stomach. "I don't want violence. I don't want to be the reason something explodes and she comes into a world that's vibrating with aftermath." A pause. "I just want it to stop. I want him to not be able to do this to anyone else. I want the door to stay closed. That's all." Dante was quiet. He was thinking about what she didn't know yet about Marco Stein. About the name Petrov had given him in the corridor. About the full architecture of what he had spent 3 days mapping. About the second name, the one closer than Marco. He didn't tell her any of it. Not because he was hiding it. Because this moment her, the room, the monitor, the fragments she had just handed him, was not the moment for information. It was the moment for something smaller and more important. He said, "Okay." Just that. She looked at him. "Okay," he said again. And for the first time in 4 months, Maribel Voss cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. The specific quiet crying of someone who has held something so long that the simple act of being believed, not rescued, not fixed, just believed, is enough to make the body release what it has been gripping. He did not move closer. He did not hand her anything. He sat beside her and let her cry and looked at the wall and breathed, and was simply, completely present in the room without requiring anything from it. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. When she stopped, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at the monitor and said, "She moves more at night. She knows you're paying attention," Dante said. Maribel almost smiled. Almost. It was the closest her face had come to it in a very long time, and Dante saw it and did not comment on it because some things are too fragile to name out loud. He left an hour later. In the parking lot, he called Petrov. "The second name," he said. "Tell me everything." The second name was Deshawn Pruitt. Dante stood in his office at 11:15 at night and looked at 12 years of loyalty, sitting in a folder on his desk, and felt the specific cold of a man discovering that the thing he trusted most was the thing he should have examined most carefully. Deshawn Pruitt had been with him since the beginning. Not like Marco Stein. Marco was acquisition, useful, a man hired for a function. Deshawn was different. Deshawn had been there in the years before the empire was an empire, when it was just a system of decisions being made by a 24-year-old who was still learning what kind of man he was going to be. Deshawn had sat across tables and told him the truth when telling the truth required something, had buried people with him, had made phone calls at 2 a.m. that no one else would have made. He had also, over the past 3 years, approved contractor relationships that fed Hartwell's network, not because he was cruel. The report made that clear. There was no financial benefit to Deshawn, no secondary arrangement, no evidence of anything except the same moral laziness that had infected Marco Stein. A referral here, a signed approval there, the willingness to let a thing proceed because stopping it would have required asking questions he had decided, somewhere quietly, not to ask. Dante sat with the folder for a long time. Then he called Carver. "I have everything I need on Hale," Dante said. "Pull together the full documentation package. Contracts, financial records, the footage, the LLC structure, the connection to Sims. All of it organized for 2 audiences, legal and press." "Both?" "Both, simultaneously." A pause. "That's an aggressive timeline." "Yes." Dante, if we move on both at once, Hale won't have anywhere to put the pressure. He'll come at the people around him. Sims, the women in the contracts, anyone he thinks he can use as, I know. Which is why the housing arrangements need to be in place before we move. For all 3 confirmed households, Lena is already working on one. I need the other 2 handled in the next 72 hours. Silence. "That's a lot of moving parts," Carver said. "Yes," Dante said. "It is." He ended the call. His men expected violence. He understood that. It was what the situation called for in the grammar of the world he operated in. A man had done a specific set of things. There were consequences attached to that category of action, and the consequences in his world had a traditional shape. Fast, visible, unambiguous. But Maribel had said, "I don't want violence." She had said, "I don't want her to come into a world that's vibrating with aftermath." And he kept returning to that. Not because it constrained him. He was not constrained by sentiment. He was too old and too experienced for that particular romanticism. But because she had given him a specific request, in a hospital room, in pieces, at the exact moment when she had nothing left to protect herself with, when she was most vulnerable and most honest. And the specific request was, not violence. He had said, okay. He was a man who kept his word. The harder part was Deshawn. Petrov appeared in the doorway at 11:40. "You want me to bring him in?" Dante looked at the folder. "Not tonight." "When?" "When I can do it without..." He stopped, started again. "When I can sit across from him and not make a decision I'll have to live with longer than the one I'm trying to solve." Petrov nodded once and left. Dante sat alone. The grief anchor had been sitting in him since the day he was 12 years old, and stood in a parking lot and watched a woman being loaded into an ambulance that arrived too late, and understood for the first time that the world contained systems that consumed people quietly and efficiently while everyone around them went about their days. He had built his entire empire, consciously or not, as a response to that parking lot. as a mechanism for ensuring that he would never again stand in a place where he had no power to affect what was happening. And yet, he looked at the folder with Deshawn's name on it. He thought about a doctor across the city saying, stress could harm the child. 144 beats per minute. A baby who moved more at night because she knew her mother was paying attention. He picked up the phone, called a judge he had known for 9 years, asked a question, got an answer, put the phone down, and gave an order that confused every man in his organization. No one touch Ronan Hale. Petrov, standing in the doorway again, repeated it back. No one touches him, Dante confirmed. Not his person, not his property, not his car, not his dry cleaning. Nobody breathes in his direction. Then how? I'm dismantling him. A pause. There's a difference. And somewhere across the city, in a way that Ronan Hale would not understand until it was already complete, the first door closed. Maribel said yes on a Thursday morning. Dante had not expected it to be easy. He had prepared for resistance, had thought through the conversation 3 ways, had anticipated her saying no. He had understood that a woman who had been inside a control system for 4 months was going to look at an offer of help from a powerful man and hear the echo of every other time a powerful man had offered her something that turned out to have conditions attached. He had been ready for all of that. What he had not been ready for was the way she looked at him when he laid it out the documentation, what it contained, what it could do in the hands of the right attorney and the right journalist, and what her testimony would add to it that the documents alone could not. She looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they have been hoping for without letting themselves name the hope. If I testify, she said slowly, it becomes public. Yes, my name, my situation. Yes, I won't tell you otherwise. She was quiet. He'll know it was me, she said. He'll know. And he'll be in a position where knowing it changes nothing about what happens to him. That's the structure we're building by the time your name is attached to anything. The legal case is already sealed and the press package is already moving. He'll have no leverage and no audience. She looked at her hands. You've already been building this, she said, before I said yes. Yes. Why? He thought about how to answer that honestly. Because what I saw on that footage didn't require your permission to make me angry, he said. But what I do about it does. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the hospital window, the city moved. Buses, cabs, people crossing intersections without looking up, carrying the ordinary weight of their ordinary days, completely unaware that in a room on the 4th floor, a woman was deciding whether to stop being invisible. I'm scared, she said. I know. Not of him. She shook her head. Of all of it, of what comes after, of being the person who... She stopped. I've spent so long trying not to be seen. I know. And now you're asking me to stand in the most visible place possible. I'm not asking, he said. I'm telling you the option exists. What you do with it is yours. She looked at the monitor. The steady rhythm. 144. She deserves a world where someone told the truth, Maribel said quietly. It wasn't directed at him. It was a decision arriving out loud. She told the truth on a Friday, in a law office in Midtown, to an attorney named Celestine Okafor, who had spent 11 years building labor exploitation cases, and who sat across the table from Maribel, with a legal pad and a recorder, and the particular focused stillness of a woman who understood the weight of what she was being handed. It took 4 hours. Dante was not in the room. He was in the hallway, on a chair that was too small for him, in the same posture he had held in the hospital waiting room, elbows on knees, not looking at his phone. Petrov stood at the end of the hall. At the 2-hour mark, Dante's phone buzzed. Carver. The financial records cleared the second verification. The LLC structure is fully documented. The journalist at the Tribune is confirmed she'll hold until we give the signal. Don't give the signal until Celestine files. Understood. At the 3-hour mark, one of Hale's associates called Dante's office line. Lena, per instructions, said he was unavailable. At 4 hours and 12 minutes, the door to the conference room opened. Celestine Okafor came out first. She looked at Dante with the expression of someone who has just received exactly what they needed and is still processing the weight of it. She's extraordinary, Celestine said quietly. Dante said nothing. Maribel came out behind her. She looked smaller than usual. The way people look after they've set something down they've been carrying too long. Not relieved exactly. More like the body relearning what it felt like to stand without that specific weight. She looked at Dante. He stood up. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and held out her hand. In her palm was the broken wristwatch. He looked at it. "I don't want to carry it anymore," she said. "I kept it because I don't know why I kept it. But I don't want it anymore." He took it. Their hands touched this time. Fully. His fingers closing around the watch and around the edge of her palm for 1 second before she pulled back. She looked at the floor. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said. "Celestine files. And then the doors close, one at a time. And if the legal system—" She stopped. What if it doesn't hold? It was the right question. The honest question. The one that lived underneath every case that had ever been built on the testimony of someone without money or connection against someone with both. He held the watch. "Then I use every other tool I have," he said, "legally, and it will be enough." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked to where Celestine was waiting, and didn't look back. Dante stood in the hallway holding a broken watch that had stopped at 4:17. That night, the filing went in. The next morning, the Tribune piece went live. And by noon, Ronan Hale's phone had stopped being answered by people who mattered. But the court date was still 3 weeks away. And 3 weeks, in a situation like this, was long enough for everything to go wrong. The legal system moved the way it always moved, slowly, unevenly, with the particular friction of a process that had been built for documents and procedures, and not for the specific urgency of a pregnant woman who needed it to be over. Celestine filed on a Friday. By Monday, Hale's attorneys had responded with a counter-filing that challenged the admissibility of the financial records on a technical procedural ground that had nothing to do with whether the records were true and everything to do with how they had been obtained. It was a delay tactic, Celestine said so plainly, sitting across from Dante in his office with a coffee she hadn't touched, and it was going to cost them 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Maribel was 34 weeks pregnant. Dante sat with that number. "Can it be challenged?" he asked. "Yes. I've already drafted the response, but judges in this district move at their own pace, and there is no expediting mechanism that—" "There's always a mechanism," Dante said. Celestine looked at him steadily. "A legal one." A pause. "Yes," he said. "A legal one." She held his gaze for a moment. "Then yes, there's a motion I can file. It requires additional documentation of ongoing harm, something that establishes that delay itself causes damage. File it. I'll need whatever you need. You'll have it by tomorrow morning." She picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it down. "You know, in 11 years of this work, I have never had someone on the resource side of a case move this fast." Dante said nothing. "It matters," she said. "I want you to know that it matters." He nodded once and looked at the city through the glass wall, and thought about a parking lot when he was 12 years old, and an ambulance that arrived too late, and thought about how the distance between that parking lot and this office was 22 years of decisions, and how the decisions had all been pointed at building something that could respond when response mattered. This was what it was for. He had not known that until now. Ronan Hale lost his first contractor license on a Wednesday. Not dramatically. Not publicly. A quiet administrative revocation from a licensing board that had received, anonymously, a comprehensive documentation package. Hale's attorneys filed an appeal within hours. The appeal would take months. In the meantime, the license was suspended. One door. His primary bank, a mid-size commercial institution that had held his business accounts for 14 years, contacted him on Thursday to notify him that they were reviewing the relationship in light of recent press coverage and would require a meeting before processing any transactions above. A certain threshold. Another door. 2 of his 3 confirmed household contracts terminated voluntarily after the Tribune piece ran a follow-up story. The women in those households were moved within 48 hours to housing that Dante had quietly arranged through a nonprofit Lena had identified, funded through channels that were 3 steps removed from his name, because Maribel had asked for no aftermath, and he was trying, imperfectly and effortfully, to honor the spirit of that. The 3rd household took longer. He lost sleep over the 3rd household. Deshaun Pruitt came to the office on a Friday evening, 11 days after the filing. He had not been called in. He came on his own, which told Dante something that he had pieced together enough of what was happening to understand that the call was coming eventually, and had decided to arrive before it did. He sat across the desk. He was 51 years old, had a daughter at Howard, a mother in a facility in Maryland that Dante had quietly helped fund 3 years ago because Deshaun had never asked for anything, and the situation had required something. He sat across the desk and looked at Dante and said, "I know." Dante said nothing. "I didn't know the full—" Deshawn stopped. "That's not—" He stopped again. I looked away. I knew something was wrong with those contractor approvals, and I looked away because it wasn't my direct problem, and I had enough direct problems. And that's the whole truth. There's no version of it that sounds better than that. The room was very quiet. "No," Dante said. "There isn't." Deshawn nodded once. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed this conversation and found, now that it was happening, that the rehearsal hadn't helped. "What happens now?" he asked. Dante looked at the man across from him. 12 years. A daughter at Howard. A mother in Maryland. "You're done," Dante said. "Not publicly. Not loudly. You're done." Deshawn nodded again. "I need the severance structured so your pension holds," Dante said. "That's already handled. Your daughter's situation doesn't change." A silence. "You didn't have to do that," Deshawn said. "No," Dante said. "I didn't." Deshawn stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, held it for a moment without putting it on. "I'm sorry," he said. Dante looked at him. "I know," he said. Deshawn left. Dante sat in the empty office for a long time after the door closed. Then his phone buzzed. Celestina. The expedited motion was granted. He closed his eyes. "Court date is next Thursday," she said. "And Dante, the judge assigned, is Honorable Renata Ose. She wrote the paper on labor exploitation case precedent in 2019. If there was a judge in this district, I would have chosen—" "It's her," he said. "It's hair." He put the phone down, looked at the broken wristwatch sitting on the corner of his desk, the cracked face, the stopped hands, the 4:17. He picked it up and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he called a watchmaker. The baby came on a Tuesday, just before dawn, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and something else underneath all of it. Something warmer, something that had no clinical name. The court had ruled on Thursday. Ronan Hale's Hartwell contracts were voided. His operating licenses, suspended pending the administrative appeals, were formally revoked. Celestine Okafor stood in the hallway outside courtroom 14B afterward and called Dante and said, in the measured voice of a woman who had learned to manage her own relief carefully, "It held." 2 words. It held. Dante was standing in his office when the call came in. He stood very still for a moment after Celestine hung up and looked at the city through the glass wall and felt something in his chest that he could not immediately identify, not triumph, not satisfaction, something quieter and more permanent than either of those. The specific feeling of a thing being resolved that you did not know you had been waiting to resolve. He had not told Maribel about the court outcome directly. Celestine had called her. That was the right shape of things. The attorney who had sat with her for 4 hours and taken the truth she handed over had earned the right to deliver the result. Lena had told him, secondhand, that Maribel had said nothing for a long moment on the phone, and then said, "Thank you," and then asked about the other women. That was the first thing she had asked. The other women. Dante had sat with that for a long time. The housing was finalized 5 days after the ruling. A place in a neighborhood that had good light in the morning's east-facing windows, a small yard in the back, a building with a super named Gerald, who had a loud laugh, and neighbors who left produce from the weekend market outside each other's doors. Lena had found it. Dante had funded it through 3 layers of remove because Maribel had asked for no aftermath, and he was still trying to honor that, imperfectly, in every way he could. She moved in on a Sunday. She had 1 plastic bag from when she came to the mansion. She had 4 bags now. She stopped in the doorway of the east corridor on her way out. Looked at the shelf she had cleaned on the first evening, the one where the chandelier light caught wrong and the sleeve slipped. She stood there for a moment. Then she took the broken wristwatch from her pocket, set it on the small side table beneath the shelf, walked out. He watched from the upper landing. He did not call after her. He waited until her car was gone. Then he walked down the stairs and picked up the watch from the table and held it in his palm for a long moment in the empty corridor with the chandelier humming above him. He had already had it repaired. He had picked it up and taken it to a watchmaker on Castellane Street 2 weeks ago. A man named Aubrey, who worked out of a shop the size of a closet and wore a loop on his head like a crown, and did not ask questions about the cracked crystal or the dented casing or why someone needed a stopped watch running again. The watch was fixed. It kept time now. He had been carrying it in his jacket pocket for 9 days, not knowing what to do with the fact that it was repaired and she had left it behind. He stood in the corridor and looked at it. 4:17 was the past now. The hands were moving. The baby came at 5, 6 inches the morning, 11 days after the ruling, in a room where Maribel held onto her own hand because she had decided, at some point in the months behind her, that she was done waiting for someone else to hold it for her. The cry arrived like something the room had been waiting for. Not loud, not dramatic. The specific cry of a new thing discovering that the world has air in it. Maribel held her, and did not panic, and did not flinch, and did not check the door to see if anyone was coming. She just looked at her daughter's face. A face that had never seen fear. A face that did not yet know what it felt like to apologize for existing. She named her Lena Zuri. Both names. Dante received a photograph at 6:14 inches the morning. No message. Just the image Maribel, in a hospital bed, looking at a child the way people look at things that have restored something they believed was permanently gone. She was not performing anything. She was not managing anything. She was just there. Fully there. The most present he had ever seen a human face look. He sat with the photograph for a long time. Then he got up, walked to the east corridor, stood in front of the small side table where she had left the watch, and placed the repaired watch back on the table. He had thought about sending it to her. He had decided against it. Some things don't need to be returned. Some things just need to exist, running, in the space where they stopped proof that what was broken can move again, even if no one is watching it, even if the healing happens in a room where no one is keeping score. He stood in the corridor where he had first seen the bruises, and felt the distance between that evening and this morning like a physical thing, like a room you have crossed that is longer than it looked from the doorway. He thought about a church basement, a girl who laughed louder than anyone, a bread roll split down the middle without being asked. He thought about what it meant that the most important things he had ever done in his life, the decisions that had actually mattered, that had bent the shape of something, had not been made in boardrooms or across negotiating tables. They had been made in hallways, in hospital waiting rooms, in the quiet of an office at 2 a.m, when everyone else was asleep, and the choice in front of him was between what was easy and what was right. He thought about Deshawn. He thought about Marco. He thought about Ronan Hale, alive, stripped of everything that had made him dangerous, living in the specific powerlessness of a man who cannot find a door that opens to him anymore. He thought about what Maribel had said. I don't want violence. I just want her to come into a world that isn't vibrating with aftermath. He had tried. He had not done it perfectly. There was no version of this that was clean. Too many years, too many systems, too many rooms where someone had looked away at a cost someone else had to pay. But he had tried to honor what she asked for, to build the dismantling carefully, to give her the outcome without making her owe him for it. Healing is not a debt. He had believed that when he said it. He believed it more now. The chandelier above him hummed its low, steady note. The watch kept time on the table below it, and somewhere across the city, a woman named Maribel held a daughter named Lena Zuri and listened to the sound of her breathing in and out, and felt something she had not felt in so long. She had almost forgotten it was possible. Safe. Just safe. Not rescued. Not owned. Not indebted. Not managed. Safe. The morning came in through the east-facing windows of a small apartment in a building with a super named Gerald and neighbors who left produce outside each other's doors, and it fell across a face that had never seen fear. And the day began the way days are supposed to begin, without dread attached to it, without a sound that meant something was coming. Just light. Just morning, just a child breathing, and a woman learning, one exhale at a time, that the world could hold something good. This is the whole story. A man who had power chose the harder thing, not destruction, but exposure, not revenge, but removal. He gave someone their life back and never required credit for it. Because healing is not a debt, and the most powerful thing a person can do is not the thing that proves their strength. It is the thing that restores someone else's. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone who held on quietly when the world made holding on nearly impossible, share it with them. Not for the numbers, because some stories are just the right thing to put in someone's hand. And if you are in a season where you need someone to sit in the room with you without requiring anything from you, we hope you find that person. We hope they arrive the way Dante did. Not loudly, just present. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story coming to this channel. Stories that carry the weight of real human strength, that inspire, that remind you what people are capable of when they choose the harder thing. Leave a comment below and tell us, What is the bravest, quiet choice you have ever made or watched someone make? Share your thoughts. You may be the voice that inspires someone who needed to hear exactly what you have to say. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, may the sounds in your life come without fear attached to them. That is the whole wish. That is all of it.